Welcome everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Azure Backup. Essentially, I am going to talk about how you can take backup into this service. So I pick one use case. Imagine that you have virtual machines, and in that virtual machine you have data disks, right? And imagine that you have added them separately. You manage to grow the size of your virtual machine. Now, that data disk contains a lot of your important business critical data, which you have to keep backing up on a regular basis. Now, there are a lot of backup solutions available in the market, but the challenges with those available backup solutions are that they need to run an agent into that server. And in a lot of enterprises, they don't allow you to run an agent. So Azure Backup Service for especially for the disk backup is an agentless activity, which means you don't need to install anything into your production server. Hence, you are not disturbing that server, just enabling it from the outside and it'll be taken care. Let's see how this overall activity works with a little demo on configuring things in the portal. And what I'm going to do is through the portal, but you can always use the automation way by writing Azure CLI, PowerShell, or REST API call. So to understand the Azure backup, what do you first need? You need a place to store the backup, right? So you have a disk, right? Imagine that there is a disk available. That's your disk, which contains a lot of data, amount of data. And then you need a box where you keep the copy of the data, right? And that box we can call is as vault, okay? So it keeps the copy of the data inside that vault. Now, how it is going to copy that, how long it is going to keep the data, etc., are the thing which you define by, let's say, policy. So you say set up rules and you say that's my policy. Okay. So the policy is defined and then you start adding this disk into this vault as your backup solution. And if the policy says that you need to take, let's say, a backup of the disk and keep the retention policy, etc., you can do a pop backup of on demand. That means you trigger it, or you can do a regular, let's say, and every 4 hour you take the backup. If you do so, what happens like it does take the incremental backup. Now, before we dive deeper into that, I want to focus a little bit on the limitations of these backup thing. So these all the things I'm talking about are all available in Microsoft's official documentation. So I'll highly recommend that you go and check it out over there. But to explicitly call it out, this backup service supports only a specific type of Azure disk, that is managed disk. So if you have managed disk, then you can consider this as your backup, right? So the managed disk means like either you can have a shared premium SSD, right? Or a premium SSD or a shared SSD. Unmanaged disks, which are generally stored within Azure storage blob store, are not currently supported, right? And also the ultra disks are not supported in this backup service because are kind of they does not support the snapshot capability. Another important aspect of backup is that the vault and the disk needs to be in the same region at this point in time. However, you can choose to have a different subscription for them, but remember that the vault and the disk has to be in the same region, either in the same subscription or different subscription. If you have these managed disks attached to a virtual machine, and if you have multiple of them attached to a virtual machine, the point in time snapshot is not supported in those kind of situations, right? And there are certain limits available. So I would recommend you to go and check the documentation about the soft limit and hard limit, etc. And you can also consider this as a silent backup, which means that it's not going to use your IOPS, or neither it's going to pause the workload or restart the machine or run an agent, etc. So this is absolutely acceptable in many business critical application. That's why in the backup scenario for Azure, you have options available for business critical databases like SQL Server, etc. And then you can also have the support for SAP HANA kind of workload. PostgreSQL is one thing, and then virtual machine and Active Directory domain controller, blobs, etc. are all supported in the backup solution. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the demo and see how things looks like, right? So let me go into the portal where I'm gonna, let's say, create a new resource group. Okay. And what I'm going to call that out is the name of the resource group, and I'll create it in the East US. Okay. So I say RG demo back to. Okay. I might have created before, so I don't know yet. And then I hit the create. So the resource group will be created in a second. And then once the resource group is created, what I can do, I can go inside the resource group. Now, first thing we need is a vault, I said, right? And before that, you need the resource. So we don't have the resource here, but we have the resource somewhere else. We can always club that. But let's see how we can add a new disk. So imagine that you got a managed disk. We'll pick up the minimal size so that it costs us less for the demo purpose. So I'll pick up SSD with a size 4 GB. So the 4 GB is the minimum managed disk size which you get. So I'm going to pick that up in the list. So it's loading. So let me try to refresh this page and see. And I also keep another window open with that. So it is loaded now. So if I say disk, okay, I'll create the disk in the same resource group. So this is the disk group, and I say disk 2. You just remember the region, it's East US, but you can choose any region based on the type of disk. Now I'll select the lowest tier under standard SSD, 4 GB, which cost me little less. And then I say OK. And then I go ahead and leave everything normal. So I'll show you all the options here. It asks for encryption key, networking if it is under the network, virtual network, or private connectivity. And then I say tags, and I go ahead and say create. And it's gonna validate and see whether I have got rights to create a disk, etc. And then if it is successful, I can hit the create button to create the disk. So now while the disk is getting created, what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna go to this resource group and create a backup vault. Now I'll say create, and I search for backup vault. And this is backup vaults. So I need a box to keep the backup. I create a backup, and I choose the resource group. I can choose a different resource group, or I can pick up an existing backup if vault if it is there. But since I don't have, for the demo, I'm going to create a new one. I have created this. So I say back vault 2. Okay, that's the name of the backup vault. And region is absolutely important. It has to match with the region of the resource. So if you have a disk in West US, it's not gonna pick that up and be able to save it. Now you can see that I just come out here, choose a drop down, and then I select a locally redundant um, option, which is not very highly available, and I make sure that it is there. And I choose the tag and I go ahead and create it. Now this is gonna validate and say create it. Now the backup vault will also be created. Now what I have done is that I have created a disk which needs to be backed up. Now obviously it is attached to a virtual machine or a case cluster, anything of that sort. And then this backup is gonna take that disk. But for that, I said that you need a policy. You need to tell what is that backup, the way it should work, right? So what is the kind of um, activity it is allowed to do. So that's what you need to define in the policy. So while it is getting created, I want to explicitly call out few things. There is something called a backup center. So it's a single pane for you to monitor all your backup solutions, right? So we'll be using that backup center for viewing purpose of what activity is going. So backup vault is now ready. So I go to the resources. I'll see that I have got all these things created. I'll go to the backup policy and I define a backup policy, right? So right now I don't have any backup policy. I click on the add and you can see that the policy name. So I say backpol2, that's the name of the backup policy. And you can see that it is asking me to choose what is the kind of backup I need to define. So I'll choose Azure Disks, right? So I'll select the Azure Disks. The vault is this one, right? And then I have the East to West, and I say, what's the retention policy here? And then in that policy, it defines the frequency schedule. So either it could be hourly or daily. So assume that I choose an hourly backup of every 6 hours, right? So 4 times in a day, it'll be backed up. And then what is the retention policy, which I can change in terms of like if I would like to change that um, retention policy, you can do that, right? So I'll say no. And you can also add retention rule by yourself, right? Backup taken every day, backup taken every week, and then retention duration is 12 weeks or something on that line. So I'll cancel this and I say review and create, and it's gonna go ahead and validate my rights and then create it. So now the policy is now will be created and available for me to pick up from. So you can create different policies within the same backup vault, right? Once the policy is created, you can see that it is done. So the notification says that policy is created successfully. I say backup instances. Okay, that's when I have to select what I need to backup. Now, if you click on the plus backup icon, where it asks you what is the data source you are interested in. So I'm interested in Azure Disks, which I have already created. And then what is the vault? This is the vault. And I hit next. And it asks me what is the policy you want to use. So I'll select the default policy, which I have just now created. And I say next. And then you can say the data source. Here I don't have any. So it's going to show me all the disks which are not backed up. Now you have seen before that there are certain disks which are there, but there is disks are also available in East US. So which means that they're not visible. That means they're already backed up. So I tested them with a backup solution before, hence they are not showing up in this list, right? Otherwise, you will see all the disks in the East US region displayed in this list, right? So I will select the disk 2, which I just now have created, though we don't have any data. And then I say yes. And then what it essentially will be doing, if you click on the validate, right? it's going to go ahead and check the role assignment. Now, there is a missing role assignment, and it's easy to assign that missing role assignment. So select the disk and send, say, assign role assignment, right? And you can either create a resource group level or a subscription level. So if you choose a resource group level, ideally your snapshot should be in a different resource group, not in the same resource group. But imagine that you just select that resource group. Let's see how it goes. Otherwise, you have to create a separate resource group and then put it in a different resource group. That's the recommended way of doing it, right? So once this deployment is done, it takes some seconds, around I think 40 seconds to replicate that, etc. If there is a requirement to wait, it'll wait for you to allow revalidation, right? So let me see the progress over here in this. So it is saying deployment in progress, right? So you can see that it is kind of roll and there is no error so far. Hopefully there'll be no error. In case there is an error, we have to look into that and then fix that problem. But generally, we are fine. So you can say deployment is successful. Now it is waiting for 1 minute actually to allow to revalidate, because when you assign a role to a certain entity, right, it uses system managed identity, um, and then it needs to gives some time to the system to propagate that properly and be recognized within that. So that's the typical safest way of doing it. So not immediately as soon as the transaction is over, sort of thing. You can wait and then watch it. Like it automatically gives you that flexibility of waiting. So it is now almost reaching at its limit, and once it reaches there, like 0 second, then you will find that it will be validated, and then there'll be a green mark next to the disk available in the page which I'm right now. You don't have to explicitly click on the revalidate. It's being done automatically because um, after the revalidation, you have figured out that there were missing roles, right? So you just kind of enabled it, and then revalidating is kind of activated, and it'll be revalidated. Once it is revalidated, the green checkbox will be marked, and you'll soon find in the portal that option will be visible to you, right? So just we'll wait for a second while it is doing the backup. And as you have seen that it does allow you to do the backup for your storage account, for your PostgreSQL. So these are all like, for example, the storage account does have a redundancy policy, but beyond that, if you want to take a backup of the storage account, if you are storing important business data, that role assignment is complete. You can see that the green box is coming up, which means if I close this now, you'll see that it's a success, right? So the validation is successfully done. Now, if I say next, what happens, right? And then I can click on the configure backup, and by doing the configure backup, it'll start configuring the backup for the disk using the policy for that vault. Okay, so that's all these steps will be done step by step for you automatically. Now, all these things which I'm doing in the portal is good for demo because I needed to show you all the options and they're visible in front of us. But in actual scenario, we must do that through automation, either by calling the REST API or by calling the Azure CLI or PowerShell script. So let me do a refresh here, and then you will find the disk is visible, and that will tell you the configuration details, right? It is going to configure that. So let me go back into the protection, go to this, go to instances, show you the disk, and protection configured option is coming. You click on the disk, it shows you that it is completed, and then you can actually back do an on-demand backup, right? So if you say backup now, that's an on-demand backup. So if I say on backup, it's triggering a backup for the disk too, and it's on demand. So you can always trigger that if you are, let's say, dumping a lot of data for a specific activity, and I feel like you need to save it as soon as you are done with those dump, then you just do the backup and then move on, because then you can come back and then restore it later point in time. You can also do an on-demand restore of the disk, right? So what is the restore point you want to pick up from? So if there are multiple restore points, you'll find them. So far, there is no, because I have selected the 6 hour this thing, right? So that's there for them. So you will find the option once the restore is done. So the backup is kind of easy to configure, and you can see that even if I do not have a virtual machine, I still cannot run an agent, especially for the past services like storage, PostgreSQL. I cannot run an agent there because I do not have access to those machines. And same with Azure Disk. Now, if it is attached to a VM, I don't need to install any agent. So it is an agentless way of handling the backup solution elegantly and effectively. So hope you have enjoyed, and hope you will enjoy using this service and explore to see wherever it fits in your architecture in terms of business criticality, disaster recovery kind of solution, where you need to implement these kind of things to save the data, especially around the RPO side of the story, how much data you don't want your business to lose, and what maximum let's say support you want to give. All these things really matters over there. So with this, thank you very much, and hope you have enjoyed this demo. Have a great day.